coming. He's Stacy. Oh, he is coming? Oh, Cordell, are you there? Oh, he left his hand out.
No, yes, I'm here. I'm here. I was on mute.
Okay, we don't need you yet. I was just checking because the screen went totally blank over here. Yeah, no, first of all, turn on it.
Okay.
try to put the phone on Do Not Disturb in case anyone tries calling. Hey, how's it going?
What? I didn't put that there. I don't know where that came from. It wasn't there before. That's
Leave it over here.
So yeah, they get you first. Grab it. Yes, hurry. Oh, no, 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 she's fine.
Especially Americans. Especially Americans. I mean, you not that much, but the Americans are like squeezing their elbow, like yeah, because I don't like so it's like yeah, I don't know why, because they like keep themselves like in the glass, glass glock. I don't know how you say it. Like there's a term in even in Boston like and I know there's a term in English. Oh, now we wear masks, but not because we are cold, but because of the air pollution. Yeah, because of the air pollution. Like just like in Beijing, they're just like awful. I hate summer like during the like. I mean, I study there. It's really nice city during the summer and autumn and whatever, but during the winter time, just I mean, you get headaches. And you get I literally if you're not there like last year, I just landed
officials are coming?
We haven't had anyone confirmed
All right.
at this point, so they said they might stop by, but almost everyone has a conflict.
All right.
So this is just saying Cordell is on the phone. So Cordell, can you hear us?
Mr. Carter?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
All right.
perfect.
Real good. We're gonna
Hello, sir.
Good morning. We're going to make this technology work. Oh,
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity, sir.
all right. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today to discuss the role of public diplomacy and the role that it can play on both sides of the Atlantic by cultivating leaders who embrace the core tenets of democracy. In my view, this hearing could could not be more timely, given that by December 2020, this time next year, more than 40 parliamentary, presidential, and other elections will be held in the 57 North American and European countries who make up the OSCE region. This includes elections in our own country. This year, under my leadership, the Helsinki Commission has held events on the importance of international election observation, good governance, and focused on democratic backsliding in particular countries as part of our continued commitment to the underlying principles of the Helsinki Final Act. Common to all these issues is the role good leaders can play in ensuring free and fair elections, laws that are equitable, transparent, and enforced, and laying the groundwork to ensure protections and rights for all in their constituencies. It is therefore only right that we end this year with a focus on the role leaders play in advancing our democracies and how we can build the future of inclusive leadership for the long-term stability of our nation and the transatlantic partnership. Our country has a long history of working with civil society to bring European leaders to the United States and send American leaders abroad through the State Department's International Visitors Leadership, Fulbright, and other programs, such as the German Marshall Fund, which has worked with us quite a bit. Europe has similarly found value in professional exchanges, such as the European Union's Visitors Program and numerous other bilateral programs that bring Americans to Europe and vice versa, and establish ties of mutual understanding through people-to-people relationships. Surprisingly, we're witnessing numerous challenges in Western leadership today, putting our democracies and the transatlantic partnership at risk. The failure of elected leaders and their staff to recognize, protect, represent, and serve the entire constituencies, problematic interpretations of democratic principles to fit political ambitions, garner power, and exclude others, the inability to build coalitions for the common good, the exploitation of differences to integrate divisions and violence within communities and in between one's own citizenry, the modeling and rewarding of behavior not benefiting or consistent with international commitments. And this is not a comprehensive list. It's no wonder transatlantic citizens are losing faith that democracy can deliver. It's no wonder countries yet to adopt democratic principles point to continuing economic, racial, and other disparities in wealth, health, education, and our justice systems. Humanitarian assistance and other sectors such as proof that Western democracies are not living up to their own ideals and alternative governing structures are better. And I'm glad our expert witnesses are here today to discuss what our approach to leadership programs for the 21st century should be, given domestic challenges to our own democracy and others across the transatlantic space, something is broken. Today, we aim to talk about fixing it by discussing how the U.S. can better utilize public diplomacy and other programs in developing and supporting democratic leaders here and overseas. And today is just the beginning of these efforts. I would first like to thank Nida Ansari, whom we borrowed from the State Department for her assistance with this and other hearings. And even though she has bad cold, she certainly is helping us. 2 weeks ago, Nida, with the support of the Commission, worked with the U.S. Consulate in Milan to launch a new public diplomacy program to strengthen civic engagement and leadership in Italy's diverse youth. The program touched over 200 people and is already slated for a follow-on program next year. We are saddened that this will be Nida's first last hearing with the Commission, but look forward to Nida continuing to work with her to advance these and other programs critical to placing young people on the path to being responsible members of their communities by engaging in their democracies. I will work with my colleagues to introduce legislation in support of this and other public diplomacy efforts that empower the next generation. And Nida, I want to thank you for your service. In September, we held a hearing on the state of diversity and inclusion in Europe, featuring diverse European policymakers. The hearing was the capstone in a decade of events that began in 2009, whereby the Commission has convened diverse U.S. and European policymakers under the banner of the Transatlantic Minority Political Leadership Conference to support increased political representation in Western democracies. In honor of the Commission's 10th anniversary of these efforts, I'm going to work with my colleagues to introduce legislation to codify legislation or leadership exchanges and knowledge building between diverse transatlantic policymakers and to encourage representative democracies. Next year in February, we're going to host OSCE parliamentarians here in the U.S. Congress to discuss how we can strengthen their political inclusion to advance peace and security efforts. With that, I'd like to turn to today's expert witnesses who are leading some of our country's most innovative public diplomacy and leadership initiatives in support of ours and global democracies to inform us on how we can strengthen our approach to this work for the 21st century. Unfortunately, Gordon Duguid, the State Department's Public Diplomacy Director for Europe and Eurasia, was unable to join us today to speak firsthand about these programs. The Commission has long worked closely with the State Department and civil society interlocutors here and abroad in support of public diplomacy programs, and we look forward to hosting him at a future Capitol Hill engagement. I am, however, especially pleased that Laura Berg of the aforementioned German Marshall Fund of the United States is able to provide testimony today. As a former public affairs officer at the State Department, not only was she instrumental in creating some of the U.S. government's most innovative public diplomacy initiatives for young and diverse populations in Western Europe, but she also leads German Marshall Fund's Transatlantic Inclusion Leaders Network, a program founded with the Commission and the State Department for young, diverse electeds, now heading into its 9th year, with over 200 alumni in U.S. and European political affairs. I look forward to her continuing work in partnership and to her testimony this morning. Also look forward to the testimony of longstanding friend Stacy Walters Fuji of ACYPL. an organization committed to strengthening democracies with a focus on young leaders that was also created by the Helsinki Commission, founder Spencer Oliver, as well as the testimony of Mr. Cordell Carter, who is squeaking over here on this telephone, whose work at the Aspen Institute has included participants from the Commission, as well as engaging global policymakers and civil society on the founding of our youth and the important role of Congress in the balance of our nation's power. And I wish to thank you all. If I could, I'd like to begin with Mr. Carter, ladies, if you all don't mind, in case with the technology, the possibility always exists that we can get a glitch. So Mr. Carter is nationally recognized for cross-sector success in philanthropy, education, and technology, and he's currently leading the Aspen Institute Socrates program, a global education forum for emerging leaders. Previous leadership roles with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Business Roundtable, the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, and the IBM Corporation. He has numerous honors, too many to mention without great prolixity. He writes and speaks on education, technology, and philanthropy on panels and conferences, and we're delighted to have him here with us this morning. Mr. Carter, we can hear you, so if you wish, please proceed.
Great, thank you. Firstly, thank you so much, Chairman Hastings and the other esteemed members of the Helsinki Commission for this opportunity to address you all from Japan today. It's an absolute honor to speak on behalf of the Aspen Institute Socrates program, and I want to just provide a quick background on the Aspen Institute. The Aspen Institute is a global nonprofit organization committed to realizing a free, just, and equitable society. Founded in 1949, the Institute drives change through dialogue, leadership, and action to help solve the most important challenges facing the United States and the world. Headquartered in the West End of Washington, D.C., the Institute has a campus in Aspen, Colorado, and an international network of partners. The program that I lead, the Socrates program, was co-founded in 1996 by Gary and Laura Lauder. It was founded as an education forum to provide emerging leaders access to expertly moderated, text-based Socratic dialogue on questions of great contemporary interest and importance. Our seminar experiences are collaborative in that the participants directly engage the text, moderators, and each other in vigorous yet respectful debate. That network now numbers more than 7,000 people all over the United States and more than 30 countries, including where I sit right now in Hiroshima, Japan. The program convenes outstanding individuals across a wide spectrum of industries and sectors to participate in 30 seminars a year in Aspen and around the world. I'm pleased to report to this commission that the Socrates program has been actively engaged in fostering democratic values in transatlantic relations both home and abroad. And I'll start with our international work. The Institute, as I mentioned, boasts 14 independent international partners in Germany, Ukraine, France, Italy, Spain, Romania, the Czech Republic, Mexico, India, and Japan, as well as newer initiatives in New Zealand, the United Kingdom, the Balkans, and hopefully soon Colombia. Due to the audience that we typically attract, which are emerging leaders, and the topical nature of our seminars, we are fortunate to curate 10 seminars a year with international partners. And an emerging topic, especially in Eastern Europe, is that of transatlantic relations and the future of the post-World War II international order. The German Marshall Fund Black Sea Initiative has partnered with Aspen, Romania, to have one Socrates seminar on transatlantic relations each spring. This past May, a senior professor from this very committee moderated a seminar in the Transylvanian mountains on whether technology was a friend or foe of democracy. That audience for the seminar included Romanian senior leaders from government and Moldova, senior leaders from the EU and Brussels. We had active military. We had other unnamed agencies from Romania and Moldova. They were all pondering the same question. And the question is, technology's impact on their political system, how bad actors can intervene, and what to do about it. It was very same questions that we asked in the U.S. These off-the-record conversations with experts are additive to the efforts of those who seek to strengthen post-War War II institutions. And it should be noted that the founder of ACYPL Romania, the former Romanian Prime Minister Mircea Joana, was recently appointed to the Deputy General Secretary of NATO role. And he has already started talking to us. In fact, he and I spoke yesterday about how we can use the Socrates method as a professional development tool for NATO staff and Romanian civil service. In the short term, we plan to continue collaborating with partners in Romania, Ukraine, and Czech Republic and the Balkans on topical seminars for their leaders. And the hope is that we can build a regional network of Eastern European alumni that will maintain momentum for civil discourse in their region as they progress in their careers. And in the longer term, we foresee opportunities to partner with institutions such as NATO, German Marshall Fund, the EU, and others on thematic issues such as demographic shifts and immigration, future of work, economic displacement, etc., that are confounding Western liberal democracies the world over. I would recommend that members of this commission continue to create opportunities for off-the-record and on-the-record discourse on the social, the societal anxieties that are threatening the stability of democracies around the world. Democracies, as you know, require quite a bit of work, and the Aspen Institute Socrates program stands ready to partner with you all in any way you deem you need us. Just very quickly, in my last few minutes, I'll talk about our domestic democracy work. The year 2017 marked a very important movement and moment in the 23-year history of the Socrates program. We were asked to leverage our platform to impact the USA differently. Rather than working with our typical self-selected group of leaders that convene in Aspen, New York, Chicago, insert your big city in America, we wanted to work with people in America's heartland, civically engaged residents from cities that we do not typically see at our seminars. And so we partnered with the Democracy Fund to create text-based content focusing on our founding documents, from the Declaration of Independence to Federalist 10 to What is a Slave to the 4th of July, and many, many others. Some remarkable Americans from Dwight D. Eisenhower to Eleanor Roosevelt are part of this 30-page literature review, and we are engaging audiences from college campuses to Lions clubs to little civic organizations all across America in the Socratic debate that we would typically have in Aspen or these aforementioned cities around the world. Since piloting this program that we call the Inclusive Republic in Chattanooga, Tennessee in May 2018, we have had 9 seminars averaging 35 participants per event. And, I should say that our notion of inclusion is quite expansive, as we are not just looking at demographics, but also political philosophy, regional affiliation, career choices, educational attainment. And this seminar series has sparked just tremendous interest in the dynamic history of America, and we're connecting people in the communities that otherwise would not have met. And as a lasting tribute to this work, the Socrates program is building a discussion and moderator guide that will soon be available on our website so that any civically engaged citizen in this country can lead a conversation about the founders' intent and our role in continuing their legacy and improving upon it in our own communities. We will personally deliver copies of these guides to this commission's office when they are complete. Lastly, the spark for our emerging governance leaders work, which was also lit in 2017, came out of a desire to create a bipartisan, bicameral network of young congressional staffers who will have a deep understanding of founders' intent, that Congress is a co-equal branch of government. So in developing this content, we've worked with the Library of Congress and a few others to help us build materials that illuminate Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, while not neglecting the reality of Congress today and its potential for the future. And besides providing these participants, who typically would not get this type of professional development because they are less than 3 or 4 years on the Hill, they're getting a rare opportunity to just be free. We go out to White River. It's completely off the record, and it's bipartisan, it's bicameral. There's an equal number of people from the House and the Senate, equal number of men and women. It's incredibly diverse, and the feedback from these participants has been overwhelmingly positive. Moreover, we're seeing relationships being built across the aisle and across the chambers, and that was the point. We look forward to a robust 2020 with 3 more emerging governance leader seminars in January, March, and December. I would highly recommend that this body allocate budget and time for professional development of staff at all levels, but especially junior staff, as a means of retaining them on the Hill longer and ensuring that they are equipped to provide a high level of service that this august body demands. The AFT Institute stands ready to partner with you all in this endeavor. In closing, and on behalf of the Socrates program, I thank this commission for this opportunity to speak. I thank the Democracy Fund and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation for their support of these two domestic initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Carter. What time is it in Hiroshima?
It is 12:23 a.m., sir.
Oh, that's what I thought. And we're gonna let you go. I'd like to compliment you on your presentation, and I agree with everything that you had to say, particularly with retaining staff. One of the things, and not so much the Aspen Institute, but it's my responsibility among other Congress people, is to pay young people properly so that they will stay around for a while. I have just one question for you, and then I'm sure that everyone recognizes the distance. The technology work. We are seeing you well. The Skype or whatever it is, it's working. I want you to know that. You noted that Socrates seminars are now focusing on transatlantic relations. Now, what was the impetus for this effort, and what impact do you see the seminars having in Europe, the United States, and ultimately in the transatlantic partnership?
Well, the impetus was twofold. One, I should say that I am a Robert Bosch Foundation transatlantic fellow. So many years ago, I spent a year in Germany completely immersed in transatlantic relations, and it was an incredible experience for me. But Mircea Jana, who was the founder and for up until last month, the Secretary General of Aspen, Romania, specifically partnered with the Black Sea Initiative, the German Marshall Fund, to get something on transatlantic relations. And so for the very first Socrates seminar we did in Romania, he asked that it be for transatlantic relations. And choosing the topic, it was a very timely topic. We did technology, foe or friend of democracy, and the outpouring of support and interest in the topic was quite interesting. In fact, we are seeing more countries in the transatlantic area very, very interested in similar topics. In fact, I went back to Ukraine. This would have been, it was last month. I was in Lviv, Ukraine, and did a lecture on the very same topic that was covered in May in Romania to the Ukrainian Catholic University. I just spent a day talking about what we talked about in Romania. So this topic of, where do we go from here? What's the future of transatlantic relations, and especially the institutions that undergird those relations are a very hot topic these days.
Thank you so very much. I'm sure you know Dr. Misha Thompson, who works with us here at the Helsinki Commission. And when you're back, hopefully sometime in the early portion of the year, I would like to have an opportunity to visit with you. And so I wish you good business while you're there in Japan and safe passage on the way back. The technology work, which also can bridge that chasm of these oceans and cause us maybe to have more meetings where we can Skype in more participants. This is super interesting. It's the first time I've participated in this kind of hearing, but we have live witnesses here, so we're going to let you go live as you are from a distance, all right? Thank you, Mr. Carter.
Great, thank you. Thank you, sir.
All right. Now I'd like to turn to the witnesses that are here with us, and Stacy Walters Fuji is the president and CEO of SWF Consulting LLC and has over 20 years of political and federal government relations experience and specializing in raising her clients' profiles to achieve predetermined goals through early intervention, clarity, communication, and cultural competence. An established advocate she is and consultant in Washington, Ms. Fujit crafts custom solutions to address her clients' political needs and leverages her network and institutional knowledge to ascertain success for her clients. She too has a whole list of activities and awards that she has received and groups that she has participated with. So if we could let her go forward with her testimony at this time, it would be deeply appreciated. And I'll reserve questions until you and Ms. Berg have testified.
Thank you, Chairman Hastings, and Commissioners. My name is Stacy Walters, I am former president and current chair of the American Council of Young Political Leaders Board of Trustees. I'm a proud alumna, having traveled to Egypt in 2005, and most recently I had the honor of leading a delegation to China to celebrate our 40th year of a relationship with our partners there. I'm grateful to be here today to talk about the important work that ACYPL does in strengthening democracy and promoting civic engagement in the United States and around the world. ACYPL was founded in 1966 with the mission of promoting mutual understanding between young political leaders between ages 25 and 40 with allies in Western Europe as well as the former Soviet Union. The concept was simple. We would meet and talk about issues of importance from our respective countries. Relationships would be forged, and these leaders would carry those experiences with them as they rose to the highest levels of government. The beauty of the idea is twofold. Both American and international travel in bipartisan or multi-partisan groups in order to provide an opportunity to discuss domestic issues and learn about foreign policy as well as culture in another country. In this way, our exchanges have not changed since 1966, but we've been able to develop a 53-year history to draw from our goal of exchanges, and we are able to learn about how supporting democracy, civic engagement, and cultural competency is so important. In 1966, since 1966, over 8,600 leaders in 129 countries and territories have participated in ACYPL exchanges, including 3,600 Americans from all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico.
Did you say 3,600?
3,600 Americans, yes, sir.
Right.
8 current members of the U.S. Senate, 30 members of the U.S. House, including myself. 5 current governors have also participated in our exchanges internationally. Over 10 former heads of state visited the United States as younger leaders in an ACYPL exchange, including the current Prime Minister of India, Minister Modi, who visited Texas and South Dakota in his exchange in 1993. I have submitted for the record the current list of American ACYPL participants who are elected either statewide or federally. List does not include former members of Congress or state elected officials, which number in the hundreds. ACYPL's founding impetus was to strengthen transatlantic relationships in the shadow of the Cold War. And over the course of history, we've sent and received delegations from 35 countries in Europe. Currently, we undertake bilateral exchanges with Croatia, Hungary, North Macedonia, and Russia. We are revitalizing our work in the UK, and in 2020, and we previously conducted exchanges from 1968 to 1997. Over 2,000 Americans have participated in exchanges with Europe, and we are particularly proud of our exchange with the former Soviet Union. We sent our first group of Americans there in 1971 and have sent and received delegations uninterrupted throughout the Cold War and into the post-Soviet era. In 2020, we are thrilled to be sending a delegation of Americans who are alumni of the
G that's testifying. We had him, he's in Japan, but I let him go after he testified by Skype.
Oh, really? Former participants who can recount the time spent on their exchanges with fantastic clarity, even if their trip was decades ago. Every ACYPL delegation is bipartisan. But just as crucially, we believe that every delegation should represent a microcosm of America. We aim to create intimate delegations of 7 to 9 people that represent geographic and ethnic diversity, as well as gender balance. Since 1966, we are proud to have sent 1,400 women and over 500 people of color. Unfortunately, sometimes our delegations can reflect the lack of opportunity for women and people of color within our political system. But we are proud to see greater diversity and inclusivity in both the American politics and potential participants. We believe that diversity is one of our country's greatest strengths, and we strive to represent said diversity in every delegation traveling abroad. Early in ACYPL's history, we became a traditional public-private partner of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. The Bureau has remained a steadfast and crucial partner to this day. Since sequestration in 2013, we have seen funding remain level. The grant we receive funds all programmatic aspects of our exchanges: flights, visa, accommodations, transportation, meals, and cultural activities. However, the grant does not fully support the administrative time our staff of 12 uses to design and manage these high-level exchanges. To that, ACYPL supplements its income with financial support from corporations, foundations, and our network of American participants. ACYPL's international partners also fund portions of each exchange, so ACYPL can confidently say that for every dollar the U.S. government invests in our work, we leverage 45 cents. We are so proud to be partnered with the U.S. Department of State in this important work, but we could conduct an additional 4 transatlantic exchanges for both Americans and international leaders if our funding could be increased back to the pre-sequestration levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and now I'll turn to Ms. Laura Berg. But before we have Ms. Berg, I'd like to introduce on my left Mark VC, Commissioner, and on my right the Reverend Emmanuel Cleaver, who is also a Commissioner. I did say to Mark, and I didn't get a chance to say to you, Reverend Cleaver, that the gentleman that you see on the screen testified earlier. He is in Hiroshima, Japan, and we took his testimony. It's near 1 o'clock over there, so we let him go. But we have Ms. Berg here, and she's an innovator in the field of transatlantic and global diversity and inclusion. She guides the Inclusive Leadership Portfolio within the Office of Leadership Programs, and in this capacity, she develops partnerships on the international stage to strengthen diversity and inclusion, and designs leadership programs such as the Transatlantic Inclusion Leaders Network, which builds the capacity of rising diverse young leaders from both sides of the Atlantic who hold a plan to run for public office. Prior to the General Marshall Fund, Ms. Berg served as a senior foreign service officer specializing in public diplomacy at the U.S. embassies in Tunis, and we just conducted a Cordell that went to Tunisia, Rabat. We also were in Morocco after Tunisia, Jeddah, Riyadh, Bridgetown, Bratislava, Paris, and Brussels, as well as in the Office of Special Representative to Muslim communities. She holds master's degrees in international relations and in poetry from Johns Hopkins University. Speaks French and Arabic as well as some Spanish. Ms. Berg, we welcome your testimony. I'd just like to say one thing. You've worked in transatlantic matters, as have most of us on the commission, but I'm very proud. I have 4 of my interns here today. I'll only identify one because he's from Australia. And I'm proud of the fact that I continue to bridge that gap as well. And we're glad to have Angus with us as well as my other interns. Ms. Berg, proceed, please.
Thank you, Chairman Hastings, and thank you for your visionary role in strengthening transatlantic relations. Thank you, commissioners, and Daniel Tilson, who's here on behalf of Co-Chairman Wicker. So the golden thread in my career has been to connect rising leaders across divides in order to shape more cohesive societies. I really thought I would go straight to recommendations, and then because you're quite familiar with the work of the German Marshall Fund, we are committed to strengthening transatlantic relations and have been at work since 1972. Disclaimer that my views are mine alone. GMF doesn't take institutional positions on policy issues. We have 3,500 alumni of our Marshall Memorial Fellowship and 200 plus alumni of our Transatlantic Inclusion Leaders. We have an amazing, incredibly connected and proactive network that is assisting German Marshall Fund to achieve its goals. So activating our alumni is one of the key methods that we're using in our leadership programs. But I do want to say that we're located within an ecosystem with colleagues such as Cordell and Stacy and the institutions that they represent, quite an amazing, rich ecosystem of nonprofit organizations that are conducting transatlantic leadership development. And of course, the big player is the Department of State, which over time has had 200,000 international visitor leaders participate in their programming and 500 current or former heads of state. So, you know, when we're putting our numbers forward, some of us are working in a very intimate way with leadership networks that we can see with our own eyes the incredible impact that they have. And I've been honored to work with Dr. Misha Thompson now for almost 10 years in the development of our Inclusive Leader Network. And these young people have come and testified here. Samira Rafaela, who's a newly elected MEP, was just here recently, and they've also joined the TMPLC delegations over the years. So we've really been able to see them have extraordinary impact across, particularly across Europe. Our reach into the United States, we are across the United States. We track well with the census. We're one of the organizations that has a long history of diverse representation in our leadership programs. A demographic change note, just that we all are aware that 70% of American seniors at this time are white, Christian, and largely descendants of Europeans, and that is the case for only 29% of our young adults. So with such a radical difference, we need to be reaching new generations to have them develop the transatlantic connection that isn't coming to them through their family tradition, or through having a grandfather who was Irish or a great-grandfather who was, or myself whose father was Polish. I think we're in a different world where we really need to be finding ways to engage these young people in a relationship that we believe is crucial for the United States. So that is a very clear focus for all of us who are here testifying today and in this community of organizations that are working so hard. And I think your legislation will be very welcome to make this collective effort, which brings together and bridges our public diplomacy at the government level and our nonprofit work to really maximize the return on investment that is being made. And partly that is through our engagement with alumni. And so in terms of these recommendations that I have, the first is, yes, we do in fact have our Western democracies at risk, and we need to be investing. That includes expanding funding. A focused investment on soft power, which is public diplomacy, government partnerships with the proven nonprofit sector actors would accelerate this necessary work. We need to scale inclusive leadership initiatives. That means bringing our leaders together, teaching them how to build coalitions, bringing them together across their various differences, whether that's a rural-urban divides, whether, you know, this is our different races, ethnicities, and our national minorities who we work with also in the Balkan region, whether it is our young Roma leaders who are rising in Europe and so on, that we really need to be connecting across all of these divides so that people know what it means to make a policy that'll work for everybody, so that the policy-making processes that they engage in will be inclusive. Then we all need to continue working to widen the circle of our rising leaders who we are reaching. I think of the Yellow Vests as an example where we were focusing so hard on you know, reaching, growing our circle of leaders beyond traditional French elites. We did a lot of work reaching out to young minority leaders in the suburbs who are doing amazing work and who are well connected with our embassy, but we missed the what they call the diagonal that's crossing through France, where there's a whole nother world of people who aren't being reached. So it's a constant practice. It's not something where we know that we've achieved inclusion because we have a certain group in our leadership networks. We have to always be thinking who's not there, who are we missing, and bringing those leaders up into our programming. And then, you know, we've been discussing the fact that actually it would be great for the Department of State to have a point person in Europe who could really focus on these alumni of leadership programs, these thousands upon thousands of amazing people across sectors who we've already invested in, and making sure that we're building the return on investment with those alumni networks. So those would be my recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Berg. Ms. Berg, it's pretty much common knowledge that in the last 2 years, the State Department, for lack of a better expression, has experienced some hollowing out, people retiring, others leaving for other reasons. How has that impacted your work as it pertains to diplomacy writ large?
In my particular area, which is leadership programs, we've continued to have robust support from the
Good.
Department of State, the European Bureau, Public Diplomacy, and from our embassies and the people working in the field who, we have fabulous talent in the field. That said, there are challenges for our PD officers. They often face short staffs in Europe, budgets that decline in terms of public diplomacy work. They have different kinds of admin, I would say more difficult to penetrate admin systems than maybe in past decades. They have shorter rotations. In some cases, we have fortress embassies. There are programs that can be short-lived. There's constant change, and I think sometimes it's hard to sustain programs. The wonderful program that we're working on was started at State, but spun off into GMF, and we're at GMF able to sustain something that may not have been sustainable in another context. We continue to collaborate with State on their program for entrepreneurs, for young entrepreneurs. And we're placing young European entrepreneurs across the United States in all of our cities, heartland cities, and they're learning a lot and building connections. So on the business front, we have this wonderful program going that we're thankful for. I do think it needs to be a collaboration. It needs to be the NGOs which can be agile and which are also able to sustain programs for longer periods of time, collaborating. And then obviously there can be changes in policy. For example, now I understand that there's an effort to open a consulate in Greenland that would be staffed with 7 people. Greenland has a population of 56,000 people. So if we can do that, I think we could feasibly also have a public diplomacy person who worked to really maximize the return on investment of all the people who we've invested in over many, many years and who are now alumni of these programs. So sometimes looking in from the outside, I could see that there's possibilities, that there are sometimes choices being made. that, you know, there are choices being made. So it needs to be collaborative. But 100%, I continue to be so impressed with the quality of our Foreign Service officers and their commitment to public diplomacy and what they are able to achieve.
Right. I appreciate that very much. And Ms. Fuji, it's my understanding that ACYPL aims to strengthen democracy through election observation missions. I really believe in that. I've exercised a lot of energy, particularly in the last decade, in election observation. Can you speak to the history behind these efforts and what impact have election observations had on participants?
Absolutely. We really don't observe as much as study. We have a group that's come in during the election years and during our elections since 1968 that comes in and observes GoTV. They observe how we campaign, our polling stations, as well as election returns and the response of the American people. To date, we've had about, I'd say, 150 people that have come from respective places around the world, about half of them coming from Europe, to look and to see what our transfer of power looks like. And I've had the pleasure of attending a couple of those events, and it's changed a bit in the last couple of years because there was a time when there wasn't any question about election returns in the United States. So our friends and neighbors watch very closely how we respond, and they've noticed a bit of a change in the tone and tenor of our own election results as we talk about redlining and as we talk about election returns and potential fraud. They pay very close attention to that. So one of the things that we've always said that's important to elections is transparency. And so we try to show them the real and raw story that's happening here. And it just invites opportunity to talk about what's happening in their own countries.
Right. It's very timely that you would bring up about the question of election observation. Yesterday in the Rules Committee, we took up the Voting Rights Act, and you gave a very soft approach to American elections and how they are observed. Just anecdotally, I was responsible, along with Secretary Colin Powell, to bring Russians to the United States to observe our elections. And we took a royal beating from certain sectors in our society, but I had done 3 elections in Russia, and it just seemed fair to me that if I'm over there monitoring their elections, they ought to be able to come over here and see what it is that we do. So I appreciate you very much for that. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Mr. Vesey, for any questions that he may have, and then to Reverend Cleaver.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Is Mr. Carter still available for?
No, he is
He's
not.
not
We
available
let him
for-
go. It was close to 1 o'clock in the morning in
Okay.
Japan.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. You know, one of the debates that are happening, if you want to look at how these programs are run on a broader sense, is, you know, like what level of effectiveness that they have in doing outreach to countries and trying to pull together democracies. I know that in more troubled regions of the world, for instance, you know, there's this debate about whether or not NGOs and certain programs need to put more money into governance, you know, versus, you know, things like helping, you know, build windmills for people or irrigation systems that they really need to learn how to govern themselves more. How, when you start talking about some of the programs that are trying to maintain really this post-World War II environment that we've been able to create in areas where there is a little bit more stability in their economies and they already have basic infrastructure, that's put in place, you know, and not to try to downplay any of the issues that they have with, like, you know, maybe being able to get natural gas transported from Russia, for instance. But, you know, but all that aside, they have, in some instances, embraced democracies. But like the notes have talked about, there have been some challenges recently with the uprising of people on the right and what have you. How are you measuring whether or not some of these programs are effective? Because I think that people that are going to be critical of them are certainly going to say, you know, what are we getting for the amount of, you know, dollars that we're putting into, you know, making sure that we can maintain this post-World War II order that we've been able to have?
Okay,
Either
so
or
I'll start.
both.
So just measurement and evaluation is always an ongoing process for all of us. And in fact, we annually have been convening our partner nonprofit organizations along, sometimes state joins us, to really look at how to run these fellowships in the most effective way that we can. And one of the things that comes up is measurement and evaluation. So all of us have had training from the International Institute of Education expert on evaluation of exchange programs so that we can improve our processes. And we're at different stages of developing and using longitudinal studies so that we can understand the impact of the program specifically on the alumni and what they're doing with what they're learning. And so the tools are pretty well developed, and I would say that all of us are using those tools at different levels of experience, depending how long we've been doing it. One of the measures that you've been hearing in the course of this hearing is how many of our alumni have reached the highest offices. So, you know, several of our groups have alumni present in the U.S. Congress, in the European Parliament, and parliaments across Europe. But it's not just a question, as you're indicating, of whether they make it to high office, but what they're doing with the office.
Right.
So we are also looking at the kinds of policies that they develop and whether they feel that the program was influential in the choices that they make in policy making, how they develop policy. And then we also look at the density of the relationships that they maintain throughout the network. What is the frequency with which they're consulting with people who they traveled with and who they connected with through our programming, and what kinds of interactions are those interactions? Are those substantive? And so that's how we go about our measurement, but we're also trying to do this as a community.
Not to repeat everything that Laura said, but we have a similar trajectory at ACYPL. Of the 129 countries and territories that we partner with, many times that partner is the government. And so when they select their delegates to participate in our exchanges, as she pointed out, these are people that we're going to see again and again rise within the ranks of their country. So we try to have very active alumni engagement and have alumni visits where we go back, reunions like we're going to do with Russia, like we just did with China, to keep the conversation going and to stay in touch with those people, because, as I said, these trips have such a profound impact on the people that travel, not only on our Americans, but also on the countries and places that we visit. And when those people come here and break bread with Americans and sit down and talk amongst friends, they tend to keep those relationships going. And maybe in 1983, you're visiting Texas, and tomorrow you're the Prime Minister of India. You're still talking with those people that you traveled with. So we think that's a very effective portion or fruit that comes from our exchanges. And we see that time and time again with our exchanges.
One more question for Laura, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman. Laura, I wanted to ask you, do you think that, you know, considering, especially when you look at Russian interference, which is obviously, you know, aided and enhanced by a lot of the technology that we enjoy today through social media platforms and what have you, and those platforms are going to be here to stay. I don't think there's any question about that. We just have to figure out how we're going to maintain our democracies in spite of them being there. But, you know, I think it was, you know, General Mattis had said once that, and I don't want to, you know, quote him directly, but just to paraphrase it, the less money that we spend on diplomacy, it means the Pentagon's going to have to spend more money on bullets. So, do you think that the programs, particularly, and again, trying to keep outside influences from destabilizing these democracies, is there any conversations that happen between State Department and military? And if not, do you think that the military should be like more involved in making sure that they're, backing up diplomacy efforts and these sort of programs to make sure that we don't have to, be aggressive when it comes to military action, looking far down the road?
Yeah, I would respectfully refer you to the Alliance for Securing Democracy, which is a complete effort in itself within the German Marshall Fund family that is working 100% on how to secure our democracies in terms of this kind of tech security that we're looking for. And they're brilliant, and they're working at the policy level as well, and they are working with our transatlantic partners to really figure out what policies are going to make us secure. So it's not an area of my personal expertise, but I'm very relieved and believe that we're in a good position to have our organization engaged on it with the depth and the level of expertise that they're putting forward. Our alumni help. The alumni of the German Marshall Fund, these actually between all the programs, it's over 4,000 well-placed leaders across sectors on both sides of the Atlantic, across the entire United States and Europe, including Eastern Partnership countries and the Balkans. So our alumni do engage very actively in helping to move forward the mission of the German Marshall Fund, which is to strengthen transatlantic relations for the future. And we engage them in our programming in this kind of policy level discussions at policy retreats. And we also, for the young elected leaders in the Transatlantic Inclusion Leader Network and the Marshall Memorial Fellows, we have mini grant funds for them to carry forward areas where they see that they can make a difference in their own countries often at the national level, drawing on their transatlantic experiences. So we're empowering them as much as possible in dialogue, in policy discussions, through our grant making, and then convening and just giving them platforms to connect with each other and with the issues that we work on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Berg, I speak all the same languages you speak, but let's do this in English so that everybody will understand us. First of all, let me just say to both of you, I'm interested in both of your responses. And I'm very curious about, and I believe supportive of the concept of public diplomacy officers. But I'm, with what's going on in Europe, I'm wondering, do we put people in harm's way just serving in that capacity, which is not, spying or anything. We're trying to preserve democracy. But when you look at what's going on in Italy, is it Lego? Okay, yes. They're growing in strength. Everything that I see, and in Germany, for the first time since the end of World War II, the extreme right is actually winning seats in the German parliament, and a lot of it's designed to push against Angela Merkel and her open door policy. From Italy, which might be the most disturbing, but all across Europe we're seeing the same thing, and they're now meeting up with Steve Bannon. I mean, there are meetings going on between Steve Bannon and these far right groups, and I would think that it would be a chilling issue for this country, but it's something that we're not spending a lot of time on, and that's why I'm excited about the concept, of diplomacy officers. But I'm also nervous about it. Could both of you respond?
So, yes, all of us have been watching. I think, people who are working in the spirit of the Marshall Plan are not the only people who are organizing across the Atlantic. And it's easier than ever before for us to be building these bridges across the Atlantic because of transportation and technology. It's very easy to connect with people, even people you haven't met in person. So do we need to be investing with alacrity and with seriousness in strengthening the networks that are working in the spirit of the Marshall Plan? Yes, we do. We're not the only people at work. So I think being realistic about that is a good thing, because that should bring us to consider what kind of funding we're going to put behind these efforts and what kind of scale we're going to give to these efforts. But I also have been, watching this together with our whole community of concerned citizens, and there are also some things that are going in a positive way. So I think it's important to look at it with interest and with balance. So we've got Austria, where we're having some interesting, quite positive results, and where we have dialogue going, and where we have, and I would say our young, diverse elected leaders are so good at building bridges, even, and in the case of our young elected leader from Salzburg, Tariq Mete, who's from Turkish descent family, and he had a far-right colleague on the city council in Salzburg who wouldn't shake hands with him. And, through his wonderful skill, they're friends now. And, he is able to bridge. And so getting these young people bolstered so that they are able to do their work in the city councils and in the national parliaments and in the European Parliament. This year, we have 3 young women from diverse backgrounds who are elected into the European Parliament, and they're doing wonders. They're there, and they're working on these issues, and they're so serious, and they're changing minds and hearts. So I actually believe that this is a very effective thing to do, to make sure that legislatures are diverse and inclusive. And the way we do that is by really giving the young talent the skills they need to be able to hold and advance in these offices. So we do that, and it's yielding results. So I don't see it as an entirely, in Germany likewise, and in France, we're seeing a whole new generation of young electeds moving up in the system. It's not easy. It's not easy. We know that from home. It's not easy, but it's happening, and it's a positive trend. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Fuji?
Yes, you mentioned putting people in harm's way, and I've been on several trips with ACYPL, and their team does a great job of putting together a very intense schedule. And there is something that bridges people when you are in another country and you may or may not speak the language, and you've been going 4 or 5 days strong, and you're hungry and you want to eat something familiar, and you're sitting next to people who may be politically opposite of you on your delegation, and then you're sitting across the table from people that you may or may not agree with. Maybe we've plucked a young political leader from Little Rock, Arkansas, or we've picked a young political leader from Fort Worth, Texas, who may or may not ever have the opportunity to sit down with leaders from Croatia or Hungary or North Macedonia or even Russia. And these events like this have the ability to just break down people's preconceived ideas, because maybe it's the environment, maybe they're being hit with so many new experiences, but they're able to see for themselves how things actually work, maybe able to recognize an issue in that other country. Wow, you guys have homeless people. Wow, you don't have homeless people. How do you deal with that? And so not only do you have an exchange of ideas, and you're able to look to see policies that potentially work in another place, but you have these friendships and relationships that are forged that go on. And we just think that when you can bridge these connections across the world, it's very hard to go back to, your echo chamber. And when you hear things that you've heard before, not to push back, not to be able to say, you know what, they're not all like that. I sat down with a family in Louisiana and had blah, 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 and this is what we talked about. And they don't hate us, right? Or I sat down with some people in Northern Macedonia, and this is what I understand to be the case. So to be able to give people that type of exposure and education, really on their terms, is invaluable. So yes, if we could have more money, we could have more programs and participate in more public diplomacy like this. We think it's highly effective. And since, as I mentioned before, the embassies do select their delegates, we end up with people in leadership positions that have had experiences that go beyond the four corners of a piece of paper.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate so very much both of you taking of your time to be with us. It's extremely informative, and we have a record of everything that was put forward here this morning. I can't think of a more appropriate time, and the questions that were put by Mr. Vesey and Mr. Cleaver are particularly relevant in these times, and I can't think of a more appropriate hearing than to be discussing global and public diplomacy. No later than yesterday, I was in a meeting with a former State Department official in Mr. Hoyer's office, along with 10 of our colleagues, and I was saying to them what I know to be true, and that is that Congress people are not traveling as much as they did a decade ago. And we are sort of buffers when we travel, particularly if we do so in a bipartisan way, and we help move the diplomacy that is so desperately needed in order for us, as Mr. Vesey put it, to avoid aggressive military action. We use soft diplomacy, and I think congresspersons are very good at that on the delegations that I've been on, and I might add, Stacy, when we travel together, we do bond, particularly if it's 5 or more days, and you learn things about people that make it easier when we get back here to legislate. Okay. And so I am fully supportive of your efforts and Mr. Carter's at the Aspen Institute. They have been encouraging. I believe Reverend Cleaver was just in Africa with the Aspen Institute. And you just are so much on point, and I appreciate the fact that the public-private partnerships that you all are active in, and that strong alumni. Ms. Berg, I'm going to work on trying to see that the effort is collaborative and coordinated. We can have this network of people and then don't utilize them. Each of us have people that leave our offices and go to places, get elected, and go to big-time offices as well. So thank you all so very much for being with us this morning, and this will close our hearing. Okay? Thank you.
Amazing with our